is episode 71 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast, episode 33 of Season 3. Probably going to be the last episode that we call of Season 3 because everything after this will be for next season. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the national title game that happened last night, a rather big change in the coaching carousel, a couple smaller ones, and then a couple of late portal entrants who entered either yesterday or today. So, Joe, start with the title game. It's what everybody was looking forward to. UConn and Purdue, the two best teams in the sport. UConn takes a narrow lead into halftime, about 6 points, and then after that, they never looked like that they were going to lose the basketball game. Did this turn out a little bit how you thought it would? Yeah, let's go into UConn first, Joe, because I think UConn did a lot of good things defensively. As you said, they basically stayed home on the shooters and let Zach Edey go one-on-one. And Purdue has not seen that at all this year. We've watched the Big Ten. We've seen a lot of teams make Edey pass it. Purdue's great at spraying it around, and that's how they get their threes. They don't typically run a lot of sets for threes. And that showed tonight. They only won for 7. That's an excellent job from UConn, a team in Purdue that is great behind the arc, fluctuated in the top 10 at times in three-point percentage this year. That was a Dan Hurley masterclass. And then Zach Edey has not really been bothered that much by Klingon, or as much as he was by Klingon in this one. Now, he made a couple tough ones, especially early in the game, where he was moving backwards from 8-10 feet, and then he did end up getting probably, 12 or 14 points there in the last 5 minutes just because they weren't guarding him. So he ends up with 37, but I do think they did a pretty good job on Zach Edey. They made it tough. He was relatively inefficient, and this was the first time that a team has beaten Purdue this way. Joe, if you think about the teams that have beaten Purdue this year, it's Nebraska, Northwestern, and Ohio State, and also Wisconsin in the Big Ten tournament, but Purdue didn't really want to win that game, so let's not count that for the argument. Those teams, you have to make a lot of threes, shoot over the top of Purdue, and be on your home floor. UConn, like you said, 6 of 22 from 3. They won this game handily with that. And they just shot over 30% once in the tournament from 3, and that was in the Alabama game. So to say they didn't, they are leaps and bounds ahead of any other team this year, and they proved it here with their defense. Purdue has not lost a game this year because they can't score, and they did in this one. But thoughts on how UConn approached what is a pretty unique player in Zach Edey? Yeah, that was fatigue. He airballed one, too. That was fatigue. He looked fatigued at the free throw line. Yeah, another thing before we move it over to Purdue, Joe, is that Samson Johnson, like you said, UConn plays like a different team when it's him at the 5 versus Klingon. Like, they run him in face-ups, and he had a couple alley-oops in the second half. I mean, Zach Edey, in a moment's notice, having to, okay, Donovan Klingon's the big bruiser who can block shots, can't move great, but still does all the other things well. And then you have Samson Johnson. You got to switch, okay, this is what he's doing. We got to guard his ball screens this way and this. And they were a step slow when Samson came in the game, especially in that second half. He had those 2 lobs when they lifted the screener on the left side, I think, and that's just really tough. When you have 2 5s that play at the level that UConn does, and they do, almost completely different. They did it with Sonogo and Klingon last year, UConn, when Klingon was the backup, and now Sampson is the backup this year. They played 2 completely different ways. It just seemed like Purdue was always scrambling to make the adjustment, and then by the time they did, Hurley threw something else at him. So Hurley was definitely ahead of Painter. Purdue a little bit too reactive, and when that happens, it's hard to get into a rhythm. But Joe, we'll move it over to UConn now. We talked about the matchups that we thought would happen in this game. I think Hurley mostly did the matchups that we said for the most part. They did a couple switching on their side actions, but what Purdue did do that we did not think is that they put their 4 on Stephon Castle. How do you think that worked out, and do you think that Painter made the right decision? Yeah, I think that might be the answer, Joe. I don't think that worked really because Castle still, kind of got his points, 6 of 13 from the field, 5 rebounds, a couple free throws. I don't think it worked. I think they should have switched off of it quicker than they did because Caravan had a couple strong buckets when Lawyer was covering him. So, and then Newton got going, and Lance couldn't really guard him. He was just too tall. So I think Painter was definitely scrambling defensively on what to do on one day's prep, and I don't really think he had a great answer. We did see Gillis play 24 compared to Kaufman-Renz 15. We did think we'd see that. They really did not let Gillis get his corner threes, which he's pretty good at. I thought Hurley did a great job there. But, Joe, just watching this game and now looking at the box score for UConn's Final Four game against Alabama, Bama said, we're going to make your worst starter, Stephon Castle, beat us. And he did. Now, there's a way Alabama could have won that game. Castle could have had a bad game. Alabama could have won. But having watched this, none of the stats really scream awful from Purdue's point of view, other than their threes, but they only took 7. They made 11 of their 15 free throws. They only had 9 turnovers. It seems to me like UConn wins this game almost every time they play based on what we saw last night. Doesn't seem like Purdue could have latched on to anything to win this game. Yeah, it's 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, Joe. Those are not empty minutes, even though he wasn't scoring. That's what it seems like. It doesn't seem like it seems like this may have been the average may have been this may have been one of Purdue's better games. Purdue still shot 45% from the field. They still got 15 free throws. They didn't turn over the ball a ton. This could have been worse. The one thing that Purdue did not do well, though, was rebounding. UConn had 14 offensive boards, out-rebounded the Boilers 35-28. This was something that I think was pretty shocking, considering Purdue is usually the team that gets plus 20 on the rebounding margin. But thoughts on that? And it seemed like whenever Purdue needed a stop, they just couldn't get a defensive rebound to call it a stop. Yeah, and as we wrap this thing up, Joe, we'll preview what we're doing in the offseason a little bit here. But, Zach Edey is gone. Purdue's going to have to play differently. I mean, even if they do go get one of the best 5s in the portal, or Will Berg, develops like crazy over the summer, they still cannot force feed the post like they did. When the tough got going for them, they said, okay, we're just going to dump it into the post. Now, that is Big Ten basketball at its finest. And coming back, it's just hard to come back with just 2s. And I think that was a little bit of an indictment on the conference, something that the conference has had some of the best big men of all time these last couple of years. Between Kofi and Hunter and Trace and Zach Edey, there's been unbelievable 5s in the Big Ten. But I do think their go-to was to get it into Zach Edey down 7. They tried to get it 2, and it was a tough 2. So you think the Big Ten's that just screamed Big Ten play style to me. This year they have. Yeah. Yeah, but yep. UConn's guards had 55 points in this one, and Purdue's had, quick maths here, I think 24. No, not even. 17. Guards win games in March and April in this example, and that's continuing to be true. We are in the offseason planning on getting an episode per team. We'll get to all the big programs. Joe and I will get to all the Big Ten teams. It might not be super long, but we're going to grade the season, how it happened. If things gone, what could have gone differently, what did they get lucky with, and then it'll be a little bit hard to, but as the rosters are still being finalized, but we are going to see what they look like going into the future. And we'll definitely get to some of the bigger teams in the other conferences too. UConn is one for sure because at the very maximum, Caravan's going to return as the only starter. Now he might go to the NBA too, so UConn might have to change their ways a little bit. This year's team was a whole lot different from last year's team. Same result in the end of the day. But Joe, wrapping up the national championship, anything more you want to add before we get into the coaching news? So on Sunday, Joe, we talked about the possibility at that point that Coach John Calipari would be leaving Kentucky for Arkansas. Now, it is not official yet, but it is almost that. Cal posted a video today basically saying farewell to Kentucky, thanking all the fans and the administration there. So it's going to happen. John Calipari leaves Kentucky for Arkansas. We'll talk about the whole domino after this of why this happened. But, it's actually happened, Joe. Thoughts on the move? If that still is handled by the time you look at it, it is at this time. But, yeah. Yeah, Calipari didn't have the best March success at Kentucky, but he won a national championship. He got to other Final Fours. He took a team undefeated into the Final Four. He took an 8 seed to the Final Four. He only missed the tournament twice. So, Joe, if he's anywhere else, he's up there in the top 5 coaches in college basketball. Yeah. And it's not, and it shouldn't be. Kentucky has their expectations, but if he does the exact same thing over Arkansas, at Arkansas over the next 8-10 years, however long he's there, I think he's going to be remembered up there as some of the greatest of all time. let's just go through the domino effect that's led to this first. SMU fires their coach. They hire Andy Enfield, who's a better coach than the one who fired, who I'm forgetting his name right now. But he's a better coach. USC comes open. Eric Musselman gets hired from Arkansas. Eric Musselman is a better coach than Andy Enfield. Rob Lanier, yeah. So that was the first one at SMU. Neither did I. I saw the name, and it's not really important, but that's who was fired. So Eric Musselman's a better coach than Andy Enfield. USC upgrade. Arkansas. Calipari, probably a better coach than Musselman. They've kind of done the same thing in accumulating talent, and Musselman's had a couple March runs, but Calipari's had better teams during those years. I think Calipari's a better coach than Eric Musselman. So all of these teams involved in this domino have gotten better coaches out of it. You don't see that very much, especially with so many lateral moves. Well, the unrealistic ones that some Kentucky fans think that they might hire, which they won't. Brad Stevens, Jay Wright. Anyone else really in the unrealistic camp? There was one more that I had. Brad Stevens, Jay Wright, Bill Self. Dan Hurley is not going to go. He might get himself more money at UConn. But other than that, they're probably... Nate Oates also, because he said no. He said no thanks. He took an extension at Bama. So now we're in that second tier, Joe, which is, I think, what you were alluding to. The Scott Drews, the Bruce Pearls, you could go deeper if you want. Mark Pope, Brad Underwood, Jerome Tang. They're probably in that tier right now, and there are plenty, TJ Otzelberger, plenty of good coaches in there. And that's one who I think, one of those names is, I think, and who they'll end up with. And, Mike was texting us, Joe, he's a little bit worried that Scott Drew might be heading to Lexington. But at this point, is Drew the favorite for you to get this job? Yeah, I think the question does have to be asked whether he'd want to come back to college at this point. He hasn't been in college for 9 years, and NIL and transfer portal, all of that will be foreign to him. He's been in the NBA for a while. So, I think he might need some convincing to come. And for those same reasons, I think Kentucky should be a little bit apprehensive to throw everything at him. He's got a buyout from the Chicago Bulls, likely. There's Calipari did not have to get bought out by Arkansas because of a breach of contract. That's a whole thing. But, it's still the NBA regular season right now. And we've seen NBA coaches come to the college ranks, Joe. And I think Pitino and Calipari could be separate from this because they were college guys first and have proven that they're much better college coaches than NBA. But the people from the NBA, Juwan Howard, Mike Woodson, Avery Johnson, have had mixed success at best at the college ranks. Obviously, Billy, you could categorize him as a college first coach, but with how different the sport is now, I think there's a way that it could not work out at a place as demanding as Kentucky. And if Kentucky were to hire him, and if they're smart about it, they would hire another person to be his top assistant who's been a head coach recently to help him with all this NIL and transfer portal stuff. We saw it with Indiana when Mike Woodson was hired. They hired Thad Matta as like a special associate AD to the basketball coach. He did end up leaving after 1 year, but, all that definitely helped Woody get into the fold a little bit. And we saw it with Duke when John Shire was elevated to head coach. They hired Mike Schrage from Elon. He's still there. So I think Billy would have to come with, a former head coach or current head coach, give him the associate's job, give him $1 million a year, and so he can navigate through the NIL waters. Because there's one thing, Billy Donovan can coach basketball. And unfortunately, that's probably half the job nowadays, especially considering he's going to have to build a roster pretty much from scratch, likely. Thiero and Bradshaw and a couple other players are in the portal. Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepard are expected or have already declared for the draft. So it kind of goes without saying because every new coach basically has to build an entire roster, but that's going to happen with Kentucky. They're likely to lose all their recruits, too. Some of them rumored to just be back open in the market. Some of them rumored to go to Arkansas with Calipari. But this is just the beginning of this whole thing because Calipari is not the Kentucky coach anymore. There are rumors that he'll have his press conference at Bud Walton tomorrow. And then Kentucky has to start their search. So it could be a while until they hire someone. And in the age of the transfer portal, people are committing to their new schools. So, in the past, you would usually take your time, try and get it right, but you might be sacrificing next year with that. So we'll have to look at it there. We've got another coach, Joe, not as big, so we won't spend as much time, but Josh Schertz is going from Indiana State to St. Louis. The Billikens had a really tough year under Travis Ford in the Atlantic 10, but Josh Schertz can coach basketball too. He took Indiana State to the NIT championship game, and with all of the Sycamores in the transfer portal, a couple of them with do not contact tags, you can expect that at least a couple will go from Sycamores to Billikens with Coach Schertz, but sneaky good hire from the Billikens. Oh, it's definitely an increase. St. Louis, I know the St. Louis hasn't been great recently, but they've had some good teams in the past. And for St. Louis, Joe, this might be one pre-NIL transfer portal era where Josh Schertz would have stayed another year at Indiana State, killed it again, and then made a jump to a high major. But the negatives of this is if you're a good major team, you are gonna be gone. Your roster's gonna be gone. So why don't you also? I think that's what Josh Schertz did. He realized that the best chance of him coaching these players again was probably somewhere else. And it stinks for Indiana State, but obviously a nice raise for Josh Schertz too. And at this point, the only open coaching job really that's pretty big is Kentucky, and then whichever one opens because that coach goes to Kentucky. So that's it. We got a transfer live update. Transfer commit. Louisville guard Trey White has committed to Brad Underwood and Illinois. Trey White was a pretty solid player on a pretty bad Louisville team, but Brad Underwood already getting to work in the transfer portal for next year. Joe, they have some spots to fill with Shannon and Hawkins likely gone. So we have a number of, I would say, unexpected transfer portal entrants today. We got a pair of Arizona Wildcats, Joe, going into the portal. Umar Ballo and Kylan Boswell both have eligibility left. Both have, been really good players for Arizona, especially this year. Shocked to see them put their name in the portal. Another big move, Joe, and another unexpected one. Mark Mitchell from Duke, the sophomore forward, will be playing college basketball somewhere else next year. Didn't quite develop maybe as much as he hoped. And, this is pretty shocking. You would think Duke was a pretty good situation for him, especially with, how important veterans are in a team that will be a whole lot of young players next year. In this age, still another COVID year for those keeping track. So this one was shocking too, wasn't it? Yeah, well, we saw Mackenzie Mbako decommit from Duke last year when Kyle Filipowski's decision was imminent. I don't think Filipowski's going to return, but maybe if he, told Mitchell, he's like, hey, I'm going to come back next year. Mitchell said, all right, I'm out. But there's not even a rumor around that being the case this year. That's, it's unlikely. There are obviously enough resources at Duke to fill that spot with a solid player, maybe even one better than Mitchell, but I was surprised to see this one. The last one I got on the list, Joe, Aiden Holloway, one of the good Auburn guards in his freshman year. He was one of, they did kind of have somebody different every game, but he's a pretty solid one, and he is heavily linked with Dusty May's Wolverines. But there's a way they could get neither of them. Like Davis, other teams are still think they've got a shot at those guys. So you gotta. Holloway's a solid player. Not that very few teams would not want him, but you're right. You got 13 scholarships, and a lot of teams in this age have been leaving them unfilled. So you gotta fill them up as quickly as you can, even if they're not exactly who you want. And there's been more and more entrants, and I am quite surprised to see this many today, because a lot of these coaches went to the Final Four. So were these kids, thinking of all of them over the weekend, like, hey, I want to transfer. As soon as Coach gets back, we're going to have a meeting. Like, I don't completely buy that. I know Indiana State, all of their team did enter today, because shirts likely went right from the NIT to the Final Four, and you want to be back on campus and stuff. But, I find it a little shocking. There's all these scholarships to fill, and Joe, at this point, if you're returning half of your scholarships, you are ahead of the curve. And back then, that would be what Duke and Carolina would have to do in Kentucky. They'd have to bring in 6 new freshmen every year to fill the ones that went to the NBA. Now, I feel like you're in a good spot if you can field a starting 5 of returning players. As good as Carolina has been, they've had very few one and dones in the one and done era, compared to Kentucky, Duke, and even Michigan State and some of the other schools. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a one and done. Now they've had some players in the NBA, like Kobe White was one, and Cole Anthony was the other one. But Justin Jackson was a couple-year player. And then they had some. Cameron Johnson was a transfer from Pitt. Back in the early grad transfer days, they've had a lot of retention. The reason why they were pretty good this year is they had a lot of retention. They brought back R.J. Davis. They brought back Armando Bacot. So they also Davis and Bacot has played 5 years. Davis has played 4, but it is assumed that he is going to be out. And then you have Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram exhausting their eligibility. You're going to have a roster turnover for Hubert Davis, and that's not something that he's had to do in any of the 3 seasons he's been coached so far. So compiling the roster, it might be more important than being an in-game coach at this point, Joe, when it comes to winning basketball games. They're all on 1-year deals. In fact, some of the graduates are on 0-year deals. If they don't like how summer practices are going, they can go somewhere else. The only thing that you cannot play for 2 schools in 1 season. That is the line that has been drawn, and if it better stay there at least. But do you think we'll see an introduction of some general managers to these teams? Because the coaches have enough to deal with. All the administration work and yeah. Got to make sure you have enough centers, linebackers. Got to make sure you have enough guards, like all that. Yeah, it's tough for the mid-majors to stack any sort of success year over year. For example, my Fairfield Stags just had the best year in decades, and their 4 best players have all hit the transfer portal. A couple lost eligibility too, but Indiana State, different team, different coach next year. So it is really tough. It is what it is. And the coaches who embrace that are going to be the ones who are the most successful. Kind of had both ways. UConn a bunch of transfers, Purdue just the one in the national championship game. So still could get there either way, but those who don't get transfers are going to be left behind in this day and age. So, Joe, that's all we have from today. Be sure to look out for the team-by-team videos coming out soon. We're going to put a schedule in place shortly for that. And then we'll still try and do a podcast every week or so over in the off season. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into this season, and we'll see you next time.